Good afternoon, and welcome to the Freedom to Buy podcast presented by SuperNet. I'm Joe Dworsky, the president of retail banking for SuperNet, which is the only payment network that enables true credit card solutions for the cannabis industry, both for merchants and consumers alike. Each week, our podcast will take you behind the scenes of banking, finance, payments, and technology to help educate both businesses and listeners like you on how to make the most of your purchasing power in the world of credit. My next guest is a behavioral economist interested in high-impact catalysts that advance humanity. He's a pioneer in distributed ledger technology and has invented novel methods for virtual learning and maintaining academic records on public blockchains. His work has been featured in The Guardian, Bloomberg, Huffington Post, and Reuters, among many others. Please welcome to today's show, James Sung. James, welcome and thank you for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start today's conversation by taking a step back and learning about your earlier days in your career and how that led to today's blockchain, endeavor and, what you're doing with that today.
I did my undergrad at Harvard University, and after graduating, I wanted to continue studying psychology, which is what I focused on as an undergrad. I did a Fulbright in Uganda, and during my Fulbright in Africa, but generally on the African continent, it's very slow, it's very difficult, there's a lot of bureaucracy. I was doing research in psychology, and I thought the most impact I could have would probably end up in a journal somewhere. Like I do some research, get published in a journal, and then that journal would sit in a basement of a library or in a digital archive and never be read. So I thought, what could move the needle in Uganda for these people? I was doing HIV research study at the time using hypnosis because Uganda, where I was, is a landlocked country. So typically we would use highly active antiretroviral medicines, drugs, and you'd give them like a cocktail of these drugs, people with HIV to prolong their life and their health. But the problem is when you have a landlocked country, everything gets taxed multiple times. So you would have to come in, say, through Dar es Salaam or Kenya, and then from that port, it would get shipped in to Uganda, and then it would get taxed once in Kenya or Mombasa, and then it would get taxed again once it entered Uganda, unless you had some kind of tax holiday for the drugs you're using for your study. So I thought, I studied the problem since I was on the ground, and I could see that when you have HIV, when you have a rapid depression of your immune system, you progress or you accelerate the progression from HIV to AIDS. And what was causing that in Uganda was getting malaria. And what was causing malaria was, of course, getting mosquito bites. But where mosquitoes were breeding were these still pools of water. And these still pools of water were caused by gutters on the side of the road. And these gutters on the side of the road would get blocked because of plastic bags that people would throw away. They would litter and it would clog the sewage system and cause these big pools of water. Mosquitoes would breed, you get malaria. So I ended up building a plastic recycling factory. That didn't happen overnight. That took several months of research. But of course, I had a lot of time because things weren't progressing. There would be board approvals for my research. So I ended up building a plastic recycling plant. It wasn't I wasn't a big plant from Western standards, but it happened to be the largest recycling plant at the time in all of sub-Saharan Africa. And it ended up becoming the kind of wellspring or the source of the plastic recycling industry for all of sub-Saharan Africa going forward, just because the model I used was the same as what I had seen in New York City, where people would pick up aluminum cans off the street and return them for a nickel. The same, we would incentivize people to go out and collect plastic for us, and then we would pay them for the plastic they would bring to us. So, it became a way of employing hundreds of people at the time. And then it became a big thing all over East Africa. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I decided I wanted to exit just because, after a while, you're growing the business and you want to expand. And Uganda, as a market at the time, was only about 2 tons of plastic a day. That's the most they would discard, the population would discard. So that's the most you could recycle a day. And, I wanted to expand. I wanted to do 10, maybe 20 tons a day at minimum. And Uganda, the government at the time, had a problem with me importing plastic waste from other countries to recycle. So I knew I couldn't grow the business, so I decided to sell it. And after I had sold it, this was about 2010. And I had been in Uganda for a few years at that point. And I had completed the pilot study that I had done on my Fulbright. And I had to decide whether I wanted to stay to continue doing my research, or if I wanted to take all the money from selling my factory and do something with it. So I decided I would take the money and leave just because I couldn't grow the plant. And, I didn't want to run into the same problem I had before where the research I'm doing gets stuck in some kind of digital archive somewhere and goes nowhere. So I thought I would come back, start a hedge fund. By that time, by 2010, I had gotten a master's degree and I would travel back and forth between Kampala and London. And I'd gotten a master's degree in neuroscience at that time. I thought I would start a biotech hedge fund. So I had moved back to New York. This is again after I finished my master's. I moved back to New York just because I thought it was the most meritocratic thing I could do, meaning I do my research and then no one decides the worth of that research. I would invest my money and it either makes money or it doesn't make money. So very straightforward. And there were no politics, no other people involved. It was just the value of the research I was doing. And I really enjoyed that. I started a hedge fund. I did investments for about a year. I returned something like 78 or 80%, something in that range. So I did very well.
Impressive.
I did all right. And I thought I would do that going forward. But then I got a call about Burma. And I got a call because I had met lots of people in Singapore during those years I was in Uganda, because I was traveling back and forth between Asia and Uganda to buy machinery for my recycling factory. And they had said, look, Burma's opening up. You're used to kind of working in these third world environments. Burma's kind of like that. It needs to develop. And, the people in Burma are looking for people to invest in things there. Are you interested? And I said, no. I had no interest in living in a resource deprived kind of context anymore. I was just getting back in New York City. But after a year of doing that with my hedge fund was a biotech focused, event driven special situations fund. So the way most of that works is you identify some kind of mispricing problem, and then you would put in your money and then you'd wait. So there would be months where I just wait and I drink in the afternoon and then go shopping, but not buy anything, because it was just letting time pass for these investments to come to fruition.
Fund was large enough, you get the management fee, so you can take the time.
I was running my own book. I didn't think I would manage anyone else's money, right? Because I didn't have to answer to anyone. I have always really liked that, not having to answer to anyone. I think when you have your own ideas, a lot of them are very unpopular. When you base it on what you believe to be fact or truth, a lot of it is very unpopular. So you end up coming at odds with a lot of people.
Did you ever go back to running the hedge fund for yourself?
In Myanmar, they eventually roped me in, and I started a private equity fund there where we did raise from outside investors, and we were beholden to the United States government because we were backed by an agency called OPIC at the time. They would give you political risk insurance, meaning the U.S. government would guarantee your investments. So like if you, a U.S. citizen, invested in Burma at the time and the Burmese government took over the investment or something happened to it, the U.S. government would make you whole.
You're talking about if somebody invested in this fund, this private equity fund that you were running over in Burma.
Yeah.
Okay. that if I invested in that,
Yeah.
I'm basically insured by the U.S. government if this fund fails?
If it fails for certain reasons, like if the Burmese government takes over like whatever factory or whatever thing you invested in, the U.S. government would pay you back for it, plus whatever expected profit was. It was something like 175%.
Governmental intervention. It's not if you make an investment in a private company in Burma and it doesn't work out.
Somewhere in the middle, because typically it's political risk insurance. So political risk is typically like you invest in a private company. That private company starts to do well. Then the government says, I'd like to be in that business because it's doing well. So let me take control of this. Let me take this from you. Like if you have a coffee shop, that coffee shop is doing really well with tourists. Then the government says, oh, you know what? Maybe this should be a government business now because it's doing so well.
Never knew that type of insurance existed. How did the private equity fund, how'd that work out, the private equity fund?
It went terribly. I was beholden to a lot of people, so I couldn't make a lot of the decisions I wanted. We succumbed to a lot of scammers who wanted a piece of what we were doing. So the way they went about it was they started spreading rumors, like we were scamming people. Over time, like it's been years now, over time, like people realized nothing came of it. So it's nothing. But when people are blasting all over the internet that they're scamming people, it's hard to get control of that, especially when you want to be largely private about what you're doing, especially in a country like Myanmar, right? Where people are like, this has a history of human rights abuses. At the time, there was a big problem with the government and how they were treating Rohingya refugees. So they were looking for any kind of bad news they could promote, kind of control the narrative in media. So that was very difficult. So, and that was exactly the kind of thing I didn't want to do, like play these political games in people's minds.
What does it mean to be a behavioral economist?
A lot of economics is about decision-making, and decision-making is largely behavioral. It's psychological. A lot of times, traditional economists try to distill everything down to mathematics. And that's very difficult for humans. So, for instance, what color is the ocean? You could say blue, but is your blue the same as my blue? And how do we quantify that? A lot of things that humans do is difficult to quantify. So we can kind of think about economics in terms of psychological effect. I work a lot with blockchains. And what people tend to miss about blockchains is that it's not just technology. They're also economic systems, but they're also communities. And you can't have any one of these things without the other. Like you can't just be technology without the community. If there's no community to support that technology, the blockchain goes away. Similarly, if the economics are poor, the whatever blockchain ecosystem is there will blow up, like with the Terra Luna kind of debacle a couple of years ago, I think now. That was a mathematical error, like a technical error, like it was never going to work, right? And just because they didn't understand the economics of it, you can't have an algorithmic stable coin. It doesn't work mathematically.
You're considered a pioneer in distributed ledger technology and have invented novel methods for virtual learning and maintaining academic records on public blockchains. Can you enlighten our listeners on some of these inventions and how they are helping society today?
I was in Myanmar. I was working with Rohingya refugees in 2017, and I had thought you could use blockchains to record academic records because it's publicly auditable, counterfeit resistant, so it's hard to fake, and it's immutable. So, like once you put in your grades, it's hard to change in the future. Like it's impossible to change. So it would be perfect for academic records. So I thought if you were to deliver video like remote learning into a refugee camp, since you can't build schools there, could you deliver tests virtually, record those test results on a blockchain, and then attach it to a specific person? So that was the bulk of my work. And that had kind of evolved to building schools in New York City with the idea that I would try to deliver education virtually, I started having problems with delivering virtual education, like getting attention, getting compliance, meaning getting kids to finish their homework. Those are difficult problems. And I saw that in 2019-ish. So like when COVID came around and people were doing virtual learning, I knew it wouldn't last, but it was very unpopular to say anything. And then I don't know if you remember during COVID, but in 2020, New York City went bankrupt. De Blasio, the mayor at the time, pulled funding from my schools. It's something I never thought would happen. And then that kind of led to the work I'm doing now, which is working on economic systems.
Well, let me ask you about the component virtual learning. You say it didn't work out, at least in New York, but they have virtual learning down. I'm down in Florida. I know a lot of people that do homeschooling, for their kids, and it's all online. It's through something with the state of Florida, and I'm sure many other states have it. And they log in and they get the assignments and they do the assignments. So how would that differ from what you were doing in the city? And I would imagine this blockchain technology obviously could be used in any virtual learning environment globally, let alone the United States.
I don't think it works. At the high end, you need a lot of self-motivation. And that is not the same for every student. And the problem is to get high quality education, the same for every student, there needs to be pressure that students respond to. And it usually comes from pressure from the teacher, where you get in trouble for not doing your homework or not performing well, and social pressure from your peers, meaning like other kids around you make fun of you because you're the worst performing student or you're not performing well. And without those social pressures, you get I believe over time, you're not going to see it in 1 year, but over 5 years, 6 years, over an academic career, you'll see like a drop in performance just because you lose the social component of school. Now, you can totally AI school, meaning what I had built in my app is using the forward-facing camera of your smartphone to track your eyes. And that would kind of figure out where you're paying attention. And it would play a video, and if you would look off to the side for more than 3 seconds, the video would stop. So it's not like you could play the video and then walk away, right? It would stop. So you would never complete the course unless you were physically watching the video. When you're trying to teach a subject that child has no interest in, but must learn.
Are you working on any other applications outside of the education arena for this distributed blockchain ledger technology?
If you think about money is our idea about money is inflationary, right? So everyone has to deal with inflation, and many of us has to deal with very high inflation, but there should be some counter-inflationary force. The way our money is created now, we need a counter-cyclical force to counterbalance that inflationary pressure, which is what our money represents. Like you earn money, so it represents, say, an hour of work, and you take that hour of work to the grocery store. So your hour of work represents a dinner worth of groceries, right? But next year, what you're saying is my hour of work cannot buy dinner anymore. So over time, like I can work 5 hours and still not buy a meal for myself. So, and that's the problem with inflation. It's not real. It's not a fair representation of what happens on Earth, right? So you need something to balance that out.
Talking about inflation, and given that you're an economist, a behavioral economist, I'd love to share with our listeners your thoughts on today's economic environment, interest rates, inflation, and a potential recession that many are predicting may or may not come. What are your thoughts on that?
An underappreciated area of research is what the U.S. Fed does. Now, the Fed has many branches. There was a paper written in 2000 at the Richmond Fed by Goodfriend, which was like a playbook for what happens in a monetary crisis where you need to overcome the lower zero bound interest rates, meaning if you need to go negative on interest rates. That kind of came to play in 2008 when the Fed wanted to go negative but couldn't, but probably in real terms, like real interest rates, like what we were experiencing were probably negative. So what they did was lower it down to near zero and they did quantitative easing. But what people don't understand is all of this was written about. It was all done, researched long before that. So part of that research is that what happens now, like the Fed still wants the power to go negative, to do negative interest rates, even though we're in a high interest rate environment. The Fed wants flexibility to do their job. So, and that's part of the reason why they're targeting 2% now. It's because back in 1997, there was research done. Larry Summers, I think, did that research on the Fed needing a cushion to lower rates to zero. And that cushion should be around 3%. That's why they're targeting 2%. So it's not so extreme. So if there is a big problem in the future, and they are anticipating the possibility of there being a big problem in the future, they want that 2% cushion so they can lower it back down to zero. The strange thing I'm seeing is that the Fed now has an account on Instagram, and they now have an account on Threads. I think that this was just the last week. Part of the research that was done in 2000 was that for negative rates to work, you would implement a carry tax, meaning you would bring the rates down to zero, and then you implement a carry tax, meaning you tax money stored at the central bank. So you would tax bank money stored at the central bank. And then you would let these banks take care of it between the bank interfacing with like retail depositors.
If people are interested in learning more about what you're doing, okay, where can they find information on what you're doing, James? And if they need to reach out and contact you, how can they, contact you?
I think the best would be my GitHub. I don't sell anything. So, and most of what I do is free. Building Burma, building dash Burma. That's my GitHub. I think you could use Building Burma without the dash and find me on most social platforms, and happy to reach out and talk about it.
Well, this has really been great. I mean, I learned a lot. It's very enlightening. I think, with what's going on with the blockchain is here to stay. So looking forward to when you have, this new program that you're working on, invention, whatever you may call it, when it's ready to come to market, we'd love to talk to you again, share it with our listeners. Thanks everybody for listening to today's show of Freedom to Buy, which is presented by SuperNet each week. You can learn more about our payment network by going to our website at supernet.ai. And you can also listen to past episodes of Freedom to Buy on cannabisradio.com. You can also get it on the Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please join us next week as we welcome our next guest to learn more about opportunities from Freedom to Buy and SuperNet. Thank you so much and have a great day.